I still remember the exact moment my marriage died because it happened in the middle of laughter. Candles were glowing across the restaurant table and everyone around us was smiling like love was something permanent. My mother was talking about grandchildren. His father was already halfway through his second glass of wine. My husband sat beside me wearing the same charming smile that had fooled me for 6 years. Then he stood up and destroyed everything with one sentence. He looked directly at me and said he could not stay married to a woman whose future was collapsing. The room went silent so fast I could hear the soft music playing from the restaurant speakers. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. And when he admitted there was another woman waiting for him, someone richer, someone more successful, everyone turned toward me expecting heartbreak. But I just looked at him and smiled softly because at that moment I finally understood who he really was. My name is Alera Vaughn, and for most of my marriage I believed I had found a man who loved me for more than money or success. I built my company from exhaustion, sleepless nights, and years of pressure that nobody ever saw. There were mornings I cried alone in office bathrooms before walking into meetings pretending to be confident. There were nights I worked until sunrise while my husband slept beside cold, untouched dinners waiting for me on the kitchen counter. But every sacrifice felt worth it because I believed we were building a future together. He used to kiss my forehead while I worked on my laptop and tell me how proud he was of me. He would hold my hand at family events and brag about my achievements like they were his own victories. Sometimes he even looked emotional while talking about me. That was the part that hurt the most later. He sounded sincere. I truly thought he loved me. Then 3 months before our anniversary, the cracks started appearing quietly. My company entered a difficult season after 2 major contracts were delayed unexpectedly. Investors became nervous and people inside the industry started whispering that maybe my business had grown too fast. I was stressed constantly. I stopped sleeping properly, and sometimes I would stare at financial reports until my eyes burned. During those weeks, my husband acted like the perfect partner. He brought me coffee late at night and rubbed my shoulders while I worked. One evening, I broke down crying at the dining table because I felt like I was failing everyone. He wrapped his arms around me and whispered that no amount of money could ever matter more than our marriage. I remember closing my eyes against his chest thinking how lucky I was to have him. Looking back now, I realize some people lie so naturally they even convince themselves. A few weeks later, my best friend came to visit me after noticing how exhausted I looked. The moment she walked into my office, she asked me what was wrong because apparently the stress was written all over my face. I told her everything about the company, about the pressure, and about the strange feeling growing inside me every time my husband looked at financial news. She listened carefully without interrupting. Then she asked me one question that changed everything. She asked if I trusted my husband completely. I answered too quickly. I said yes immediately because I thought love meant refusing to doubt the person beside you. But she kept staring at me silently and finally said something that stayed in my mind for days. She told me that hard times never change people, they reveal them. At the time, I hated hearing that because I did not want to imagine my husband could ever become someone cruel. The anniversary dinner arrived before I could stop overthinking everything. The restaurant was beautiful with soft golden lights and expensive flowers covering the tables. Everyone kept telling us how perfect we looked together. My father joked that my husband still looked at me like a teenager in love. My husband laughed loudly and squeezed my hand in front of everyone. I remember staring at our fingers together, wondering why his touch suddenly felt unfamiliar. Throughout dinner, he acted calm, almost too calm. He barely drank anything and kept checking his phone under the table when he thought nobody noticed. I asked him quietly if something was wrong, but he smiled and kissed my cheek, telling me to relax and enjoy the evening. That was the last affectionate thing he ever said to me as my husband. Near the end of dinner, he stood up slowly holding his glass. Everyone smiled, expecting some romantic anniversary speech. Even I thought maybe he wanted to surprise me. Instead, he cleared his throat and announced he had something important to say. The entire room became quiet. He started talking about how life changes people and how sometimes difficult decisions are necessary for survival. At first, nobody understood what he meant. Then he looked directly at me and said he could no longer stay in a marriage filled with uncertainty. My mother looked confused. His sister whispered, "What are you talking about?" under her breath. But he kept going, calmly explaining that my business was unstable, and he could not risk his future staying beside someone whose success was disappearing. Every word felt colder than the last. Then finally he admitted there was another woman, someone richer, someone more aligned with his future, someone who understood ambition and stability better than I did. I will never forget the expressions around that table. My father looked ready to explode. My mother looked heartbroken. His relatives stared at him like strangers, but I felt strangely calm because something inside me had finally stopped hurting. Maybe it was because the betrayal was so shameless it removed every illusion instantly. I picked up my water glass slowly and looked at him while everyone waited for me to cry. Instead, I told him quietly that if leaving was what he wanted, then maybe it was the right decision. The confusion on his face lasted only a second before confidence returned. He probably thought I was defeated. He had no idea I was already seeing the truth clearly for the first time. The next 2 weeks felt unreal. Lawyers replaced conversations. Cold, formal messages replaced affection. He moved through the divorce process with shocking speed, like someone desperate to start a brand new life immediately. Meanwhile, rumors spread through our families about the wealthy woman he had fallen in love with. People kept calling me, asking questions I refused to answer. But during those same 2 weeks, my best friend stayed beside me constantly. She came over almost every night bringing food because she knew I was forgetting to eat. Sometimes we sat quietly on my balcony for hours without speaking. One night she looked at me seriously and asked if I wanted revenge or closure. I told her I only wanted the truth to be visible. She smiled slowly after hearing that and said maybe there was still a way for everyone to see it. The divorce meeting took place inside a quiet law office downtown. The atmosphere felt colder than winter, despite the warm weather outside. Both families arrived early, and nobody knew how to look at each other anymore. My husband entered late wearing an expensive suit and the confidence of a man convinced he had already won. He barely looked at me while greeting relatives. Then he sat down beside the woman he had chosen over me. The moment she walked in, whispers spread across the room because she looked powerful, elegant, and wealthy, exactly like the kind of woman he wanted everyone to envy. He introduced her proudly with his hand resting possessively on her shoulder, while explaining how successful she was. Every sentence sounded rehearsed, like he had practiced this performance in front of a mirror. I watched him carefully while he talked because something about his excitement fascinated me. This man had once promised to love me through anything, and now he was publicly replacing me before the divorce papers were even signed. Yet the woman beside him remained strangely quiet. She smiled politely at people, but every few seconds, her eyes drifted toward me like she was waiting for something. My husband kept talking about ambition, success, and future stability, while the lawyers prepared the documents. Finally, one of them placed the papers on the table and explained that once we signed, the marriage would officially end. My husband grabbed the pen immediately, almost eagerly. But just before the pen touched the paper, the woman beside him suddenly lifted her hand and said, "Wait." The room froze instantly. My husband looked confused and slightly irritated, asking her what was wrong. Instead of answering him, she stood up slowly and looked directly at me first. Then she smiled. And the moment I saw that smile, I realized the next few minutes were about to destroy the version of reality my husband had been living in. She kept smiling while the silence inside the conference room grew heavier with every second. My husband looked uncomfortable now and asked her again what was happening. His voice carried the first crack of nervousness I had heard from him since the anniversary dinner. She stepped away from his chair slowly and folded her hands in front of her before speaking. She said she believed everyone deserved honesty before any signatures were placed on the table. One of the lawyers shifted awkwardly in his seat while my husband forced out a laugh, pretending this was some misunderstanding. He told her they could discuss whatever problem she had later in private, but she shook her head gently and said there would not be any later because this conversation belonged to everyone in the room. Then she turned toward me again and asked softly if she should continue. I nodded once. That single movement changed the entire atmosphere instantly. My husband stared at both of us with confusion growing across his face. He asked me what was going on, but I stayed quiet because for the first time I wanted him to sit inside uncertainty, the same way he had left me drowning in it. My best friend finally looked directly at him and calmly admitted that the story he believed about her was never completely real. At first he frowned like he did not understand the words. Then she explained that yes, she was successful and comfortable, but she was not some billionaire business queen searching for a new husband. The room filled with whispers immediately. His mother looked shocked. My father leaned forward slowly, like he was finally beginning to understand something important. My husband laughed again, but this time the sound was weaker. He said this joke was childish and embarrassing, but my best friend never lost her calm expression. She simply told him the real reason she entered his life was because she wanted to see how quickly he would abandon his wife once he believed money was disappearing. I watched the color slowly drain from his face while the truth unfolded piece by piece. My best friend explained how she met him intentionally after I confessed my fears about the changes I noticed in him. She talked about the expensive dinners he accepted immediately. She mentioned how eagerly he complained about my struggling company whenever he thought he was impressing her. Every sentence felt like another mirror placed in front of him, forcing him to see himself clearly. He tried interrupting several times, claiming everything was being twisted unfairly, but nobody in the room looked convinced anymore. His own father lowered his eyes in disappointment. Then my best friend revealed the final detail that shattered whatever confidence he still had left. She calmly explained that my company was never collapsing in the first place. The delayed contracts had already recovered weeks earlier, and new investors had quietly signed even larger deals. I heard several people gasp softly around the room. My husband looked at me so fast it almost seemed painful. His eyes searched my face desperately like he was hoping I would deny everything. But I just sat there calmly watching him realize the future he abandoned me over never actually existed. He whispered my name quietly, asking if this was true. I told him yes. The business was stable again long before he announced his betrayal at our anniversary dinner. His breathing became uneven as panic finally replaced arrogance completely. Suddenly, all the confidence from earlier disappeared, mattered. The expensive suit, the rehearsed speeches, the proud smiles, none of it mattered anymore. He looked small for the first time since I met him. Then he said something that almost made me laugh from disbelief. He claimed he only acted that way because he was scared. He said pressure changed people and that he thought I no longer needed him. I stared at him in silence for several seconds before asking the question that mattered most. I asked him if he would have stayed loyal if he believed I was truly losing everything. He opened his mouth, but no answer came out. The room felt painfully quiet after that. My mother wiped tears from her eyes while his sister shook her head slowly in disgust. Even the lawyers looked uncomfortable witnessing something so personal unravel in front of them. My husband suddenly stood up from his chair and walked toward me looking desperate now instead of proud. He said we could fix this. He reminded me of our 6 years together and all the memories we built. He talked about vacations, birthdays, late-night conversations, and dreams we once shared. For a brief moment, I almost saw the man I used to love standing in front of me again. But then I remembered something important. Real love does not disappear the moment comfort becomes uncertain. Real loyalty does not run toward richer options while your partner is struggling to breathe under pressure. The man standing in front of me loved security, not me. And once I accepted that truth, my sadness began turning into peace. I slowly reached for the divorce papers while his eyes followed every movement of my hand. He whispered my name again, softer this time, almost broken. He asked me not to sign. He promised he would change. He even admitted he made the biggest mistake of his life. But apologies spoken after exposure never sound pure. They sound terrified. I picked up the pen carefully and looked directly into his eyes one last time. Then I told him something I had finally learned through all this pain. I said the worst kind of loneliness is staying beside someone who only loves you when life is easy. Tears filled his eyes instantly, but my own remained dry because I had already cried enough for this marriage long before that moment. Then without hesitation, I signed my name across the papers, ending 6 years with one quiet movement. He collapsed back into his chair, looking completely destroyed. Nobody spoke for several seconds because the reality of what happened was finally settling over everyone. My best friend walked beside me and gently squeezed my hand while the lawyers collected the documents. I stood up slowly, feeling lighter than I had in months. Not because divorce felt good, but because pretending was finally over. As I reached the door, my husband suddenly called my name one final time. His voice cracked painfully when he asked if I ever truly loved him. I turned back toward him and smiled sadly because despite everything, the answer was still yes. I told him I loved him enough to believe in him even when he stopped believing in us. That was why this hurt so deeply. Then I walked away before he could answer, because some endings become weaker when stretched too long. A few months later, my company became stronger than ever. The investors returned with larger partnerships and new opportunities opened faster than I expected. But the biggest change was not financial, it was emotional. For the first time in years, I stopped measuring my worth through someone else's approval. I started sleeping peacefully again. I laughed more. I spent evenings with people who loved me without conditions. One afternoon, while standing inside my office looking over the city skyline, my best friend asked me if I regretted any of it. I thought carefully before answering. Then I told her no, because losing someone who only loved the benefits of my life was never truly a loss. Sometimes heartbreak does not destroy you. Sometimes it introduces you to the version of yourself that no longer accepts half-hearted love disguised as loyalty. And somewhere out there, my ex-husband still has to live with one painful truth every single day. He did not lose me because I failed. He lost me because when life tested his loyalty, he failed instead. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more emotional stories.